Almost always, if you buy an ebook or game or movie or music album online, you're not buying that ebook or that game or whatever else. You are buying a license that allows you to access it, often on a specified device or in a specified way, maybe for a limited amount of time, but almost always in a non-transferable, non-permanent manner. This distinction doesn't matter much to most of us most of the time. If I buy an ebook, chances are I just want to read that ebook on the device that I used to buy it, or on the Kindle attached to my Amazon or other digital book service account. So I buy that book, I read it on my ebook reader or phone, and that is that. Same general experience I would have had with a paperback or hardback book in many ways. This difference becomes more evident when you think about what happens to the book after you read it, though. If I own a hard copy physical book, I can resell that book. I can donate it, I can put it in a little free library somewhere in my neighborhood, or I can give it to a friend who I think will enjoy it. I can pick it up off my shelf later and read the exact same book that I read years before. Via whichever mechanism I choose, I am either holding on to that exact book for later, or I am transferring ownership of this book, this artifact that contains words and or images that can now be used, read, or whatever else by that second owner. And they can go on to do the exact same thing. They can hand it off to a friend, sell it on eBay, or put it on a shelf for later reference. Often, the convenience and immediacy of electronic books makes this distinction a non-issue for those who enjoy them. I can buy a book from Amazon or bookshop.org, and that thing is on my device within seconds, giving me access to the story or information that is the main valuable component of a book for most of us, without any delay, without having to drive to a bookstore or wait for it to arrive in the mail. And that's a pretty compelling offer. This distinction becomes more pressing, however, if I decide I want to go back and read an ebook I bought years ago, later, only to find that the license has changed, and maybe that book is no longer accessible via the marketplace where I purchased it. If that happens, I no longer have access to the book, and there's no recourse for this absence. I agreed to this possibility when I quote-unquote bought the book based on the user agreement I clicked OK or I agree on when I signed up for Amazon or whichever service I paid for that book access. It also becomes more pressing if, as has happened many times over the past few decades, the publisher or some other entity with control over these book assets decides to change them. A few years ago, for instance, British versions of Roald Dahl's Matilda were edited to remove references to Joseph Conrad, who has in recent times been criticized for his antisemitism and the racist themes in some of his writing. Some of R.L. Stine's Goosebumps books were edited to remove references to crushes that schoolgirls had on their headmaster, and descriptions of an overweight character that were, in retrospect, determined to be very offensive. And various racial and ethnic slurs were edited out of some of Agatha Christie's works around the same time. Almost always, these changes are not announced by the publishers who own the rights to these books, and they are typically only discovered by eagle-eyed readers who note that, for instance, the publishers decided to change the time period in which something occurred, which apparently happened in one of Stine's works without obvious purpose. This also frequently happens without the author being notified, as was the case with Stine and the edits made to his books. The publishers themselves, when asked directly about these changes, often remain silent on the matter. What I'd like to talk about today is another angle of this distinction between physically owned media and digital licensed versions of the same, and the at times large sums of money that can be gained or lost based on the decisions of the companies that control these licensed assets. You're listening to Let's Know Things. I'm Colin Wright. I'm able to keep this show ad-free because of support from listeners like you. If you're finding value in what I'm doing here, consider becoming a paid supporter for the cost of a cup of coffee each month at letsknowthings.com. And as a thank you for your helping me keep this show solvent, you'll receive an additional bonus More Things episode each month. All right, let's get back to the show. Counter-Strike 2 is a first-person shooter video game that is free to play was released in 2023 and was developed by a company called Valve. Valve has developed all sorts of games over the years, including the Counter-Strike, the Half-Life, the DOTA, and the Portal games, but they're probably best known for their Steam software distribution platform. Steam allows customers to buy all sorts of software, but mostly games, through an interface that also provides chat services and community forums. But the primary utility of this platform is that it is a marketplace for buying and selling games, and it has matchmaking features for online multiplayer games, serves as a sort of library for gamers, so all their games are launchable from one place, and it serves as a digital rights management hub, which basically means it helps game companies who sell their games on Steam ensure that users are not playing with pirated software. If you want to use Steam to store and launch your video games, they have to be legit purchased games, not pirated ones. As of early 2025, it was estimated that Steam claimed somewhere between 75 and 80% of the PC gaming market, compared to competitors like the Epic Games Store, which was founded by the folks behind the wildly successful Fortnite, their store only claiming something like 5% of that market. And Counter-Strike is one of Valve's and Steam's crown jewels. It's a free-to-play game that was originally developed as a mod, a free add-on to another game Valve owns called Half-Life. But Valve bought up the rights to that mod and developed it into its own thing, releasing the initial entry in the series in the year 2000, several main series games after that in subsequent years, and then Counter-Strike 2 came out in 2023 to much acclaim and fanfare. Counter-Strike 2 often has around 1 million players online at the same time, all playing the same game at any given moment, and its tournaments can attract closer to 1.5 million. As of early 2024, it was estimated that Counter-Strike 2 pulled in around $1 billion a year for Valve, primarily via the sale of what are called case keys, which allow players to open in-game boxes, each key selling for $2.50. Valve also takes a 15% cut of all player-to-player sales of items conducted on the Steam Community Market, which is a secure eBay or Amazon-like component of the platform where players can sell digital items that they get from the game, which are primarily aesthetic add-ons, like skins for weapons, stickers, and clothing, things that allow players to look different while playing the game, as opposed to things that allow them to perform better, which would give players who spend the most money an unfair advantage, and thus make the game less competitive and fun. Because this is a free game, though, and by many estimates a really well-balanced and well-made one, a lot of people play it, and a lot of people want to customize the look of their in-game avatar. So being able to open in-game boxes that contain those aesthetic loot items and being able to buy and sell said loot items on the Steam Community Market has led to a rich secondary economy that makes that component of the game more interesting for players, while also earning Valve a whole lot of money on the back end for those keys and via that cut of sales between players. In late October of 2025, Valve announced a change in the rules for Counter-Strike 2, now allowing players to trade up more item types, including previously untrade-upable items like gloves and knives, so they could trade into higher-grade versions of the same. So common items could be bundled together and traded in for less common items, and those less common items could then be bundled together and traded up for rare ones. This seems like a small move from the outside, but it roiled the CS2 in-game economy, by some estimates causing upwards of $2 billion to basically disappear overnight, because rare gloves and knives were at times valued at as much as $1.5 million. Again, these are just aesthetic skins that change the look of a player's avatar or weapons. But there's enough demand for these things that some people are willing to pay that much money for ultra-rare and unique glove and knife skins. Because of that demand, some players had taken to spending a lot of real money on these ultra-rare items, treating their in-game portfolios of skins as something like an investment portfolio, just like you would buy a stock or a crypto token. If you can buy an ultra-rare glove skin for $40,000 and then maybe sell it later for twice that, that might seem like a really good investment, despite how strange it may seem to those not involved in this corner of the gaming and investment world to spend $40,000 on what is basically just some code in a machine that tells the game that the gloves on your avatar will look a certain way. This change then made those rarer gloves and knives, which were previously unattainable except by lottery-like chance, a lot more common, because people could trade up for them, increasing their chances of getting the ultra-rare stuff. The market was quickly flooded with more of these rare items, and about half the value of rare CS2 skins disappeared, initially knocking about $6 billion of total value from this market before stabilizing to around $1.5 to $2 billion. Volatility in this market continues though, and people who invested a lot of money, sometimes their life savings, and sometimes millions of dollars into CS2 in-game skins have been looking into potential legal recourse for these changes, though without much luck. Valve's user agreements make very clear that players do not own any of these things, and as a result, Valve can manipulate the market however they like, whenever they like. Just like with ebooks and movies we quote-unquote buy from Amazon and other services then, these in-game assets are licensed to us, not sold. We may at times have a means of putting our license to some of these things on a secondary market, but that secondary market exists completely at the whim of the entity that actually owns the digital assets, in this case, Valve. Recent court cases have resulted in clearer language from some license-selling companies, including Valve, though in most cases the buttons we click still say something like "buy now" rather than "acquire license," and the specifics of what we are purchasing are thus hidden within a wall of legal text. So for the moment at least, this sort of confusion will probably continue, with periodic wake-up calls for folks on the receiving end of updates or edits that impact them financially, or impact their ability to access what they thought they were buying, but which is later changed or removed from their account without their knowledge or permission. The book I'd like to recommend today is called Apple in China: The Capture of the World's Greatest Company by Patrick McGee. A snippet of the book's promotion text, I think, does a pretty good job of summing up the theme of this book. This book is, quote, a riveting look at how Apple helped build China's dominance in electronics assembly and manufacturing, only to find itself trapped in a relationship with an authoritarian state making ever-increasing demands, end quote. It really is an excellent historical look, both at Apple as a company and China as a manufacturing and increasingly intellectual property behemoth, and how these two entities intersected and helped each other for a long time, only to find themselves in the 2020s both kind of chafing under that relationship in different ways, and Apple increasingly trying to get out of China, but finding itself unable to do so. Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider picking up a copy of Apple in China by Patrick McGee. Let's Know Things is a listener-supported show. I don't make any money from ads, only what listeners contribute by becoming paid supporters at letsknowthings.com. If you're not in the position to become a paid supporter at the moment, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your pods. Those help get the show in front of more people and lend a hint of credibility to independently made shows like this one. A huge thanks in advance, whatever shape your support might take.